Today, we're going to dive into something I think is incredibly important. How do we shift education from just memorizing stuff to actually gaining a real deep understanding? We're going to look at a pretty powerful framework from Harvard's Project Zero that's designed to do just that.
But first, let's start with a question that I am sure has crossed your mind. Just think back to your school days for a second. All those facts, those dates, the formulas you crammed for, why is it that so much of it just kind of disappears right after the final exam?
Well, here's the thing, and it's a huge insight, that forgetting, it's probably not your fault. It's often a symptom of how we were taught. In fact, the researchers at Project Zero found two major problems. They call them pathologies, which is a strong word, that get in the way of actual lasting learning. Okay, so the first one is called elementitis. This is what happens when we break subjects down into tiny, disconnected pieces. You know, imagine learning music by only ever practicing scales, but you never ever get to play a song. You might get really good at the scales, but you completely miss the whole point, the whole game of making music.
And the second one, they call it a circuitis. It's basically the disease of learning about something without ever actually doing it. Think about it like reading a dozen cookbooks from cover to cover. You know all the recipes, but you've never actually cooked a meal. You know a lot about history, but you've never thought like a historian. It's all just theory.
So, if those are the diseases, what's the cure? Well, to fight them, Harvard's Project Zero came up with the Teaching for Understanding framework. And listen, this isn't just some new teaching trick. It's a fundamental shift in how we even think about what learning is.
And right at the heart of this whole thing is a new definition of understanding. It's not about what facts you can spit back out. It's about what you can do with what you know. It's having the ability to take your knowledge and apply it flexibly to new situations, to solve new problems, to see new connections.
This comparison table, wow, it really lays it all out. In the old model, the student is basically a bucket, just passively receiving information. But in the Teaching for Understanding model, the student becomes an active builder of their own knowledge. The teacher isn't the sage on the stage anymore. They're the guide on the side, designing these amazing learning experiences. The whole classroom just transforms. Okay, so how do you actually do this? How do you build a classroom around this big idea? Well, the whole framework is built on four main pillars. And these aren't steps you do in order. They're all interconnected, all working together to create a curriculum that's laser-focused on real understanding.
And here they are. You've got generative topics, understanding goals, understanding performances, and ongoing assessment. So let's just quickly break down what each of these means.
Everything kicks off with what they call generative topics. So instead of a boring textbook chapter titled, the Industrial Revolution, you frame it with a big, juicy question like, does progress always mean improvement? These are topics that are not only central to the subject, but are also genuinely interesting to students and connect to their lives right now.
Next up, you set really clear understanding goals. And we are not talking about small things like list the causes of the Civil War. No, we're talking about huge guiding questions. They call them through lines that might last for a whole unit or even the whole year. A question like, how do we know what is true? That's an understanding goal. The third pillar, understanding performances, is for me a total game changer. This is where students don't just take a test at the end to show what they learned. No, the learning happens through the doing. Maybe they're designing a park for their community or debating a Supreme Court case. The activity is the learning. It's all about making their thinking tangible and visible to everyone.
And the last pillar ties it all together, ongoing assessment. So you can forget about that one big scary final exam. In this model, assessment is happening all the time, and it's diagnostic. It's about giving students constant feedback from their teachers and from each other so they can constantly get better. It's all about growth, not just getting a final grade.
Now here's the really cool part. When you put all four of these pillars into practice, they do more than just change what you're teaching. They totally transform the vibe of the classroom. They create what the researchers call a culture of thinking.
And the whole idea here is pretty profound. It's about creating a space where thinking isn't just something that happens inside your head. It's something that's brought out into the open, that's made visible, that's valued by the whole group, and is encouraged every single day. In a classroom like this, students' questions and ideas, they're the main event, not just something you do before the teacher gives you the right answer.
So how do you actually build this kind of culture? Well, you use practical tools. A perfect example is something called the feedback ladder. It's a simple, four-step way to give better feedback. So instead of just jumping in with what's wrong, you first clarify to make sure you understand. Then you point out something you value. Then you express your concerns. And only then do you make suggestions. It completely changes critique from feeling like an attack to being a way to help each other improve.
And there are tons of other simple but really powerful tools called thinking routines. These are just little things a teacher can do to get students thinking on a deeper level. For example, constantly asking, "What makes you say that?" That one question forces students to give reasons for their opinions. Or using a routine like "I used to think, now I think," to help students see how their own minds are changing. When you use these all the time, they just become the natural way everyone in the class thinks. All right, so let's pull back for the big picture. Why is a framework like this more important today than maybe ever before? Because teaching for understanding isn't just about doing better in school. It's about developing the skills you absolutely need to thrive in the 21st century. I mean, let's be honest, in a world with AI and where you can look up any fact in a second, being a walking encyclopedia is becoming, well, kind of worthless. A machine can do that better and faster. The skills that really matter now, the truly human skills, are things like analyzing information, evaluating sources, connecting ideas, and using what you know to create something new. And those are the exact skills this framework is designed to build.
You know, there's a thought that really sums this whole thing up. The job of a teacher isn't really done when they stop talking. It's done when the student starts thinking for themselves and starts acting with the kind of power that only comes from really truly understanding something. Which leaves us all with a pretty urgent question to think about. In a world that is just flooded with information, but is, you could argue, starving for wisdom, how do we teach for an understanding that actually lasts? The answer might not be about covering more stuff, but about uncovering the thinking skills that will truly empower us all.